I'm a pastor, an artist, an author, a scholar, and a conversation. Welcome to Chatfest with Kenneth. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chatfest with Kenneth. And today we are going to try and address a social issue that is affecting the community. And it might be a little, hopefully we can talk about it with integrity. That's why this person is my guest today, because I know he can talk about it with integrity and transparency without it getting personal. So we'll look forward to this conversation. So here is my guest for today. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rick Yorgey. I live in Washington, D.C. with my wife and... What?
Chocolate City.
Well, yeah, it used to be called that. Not quite so much anymore.
That is true.
Two kids living with me now. We got 5 kids, but 3 birth kids and 2 African-American sons we've adopted in our 31 years living here.
Wait a minute. Hold up. You mean you pulled an Angelina Jolie?
They actually came to us.
Okay.
Yeah. Alonzo came knocking on our door, wanted to play with our son when they were in 3rd grade together.
Okay.
So that's how we met Alonzo, and he then joined our family a few years later. And then his younger brother, 17 years younger, also joined our family when he was 7 months old.
So you know what? We're just going to dive into this because I think you just said the perfect segue. So how did other Caucasian folks react when they found out that, oh, you are adopting 2 African-American boys in your household? And when was this, first of all?
We moved into DC in 90.
Okay.
Alonzo became part of our family in 95.
Okay.
94 or 5. Eric was born in 98 and became a part of our family that year.
Okay. So this is in the 90s.
It was in the 90s. Eric is the youngest, is now 22. So yeah, it's been a long time, been years. But we live here in the city. We're pretty immersed in the African American culture and community. So it's not like we have a whole lot of interaction with other white people. So we didn't go around looking to, see what people thought about it. Our parents, both Debbie and my parents, were supportive.
Okay, then let me flip it the other way, because I'm an African American, so I know the bias that we have. And I cracked the joke about, oh, you pulled an Angelina Jolie. But I remember all the things they said. Oh, she's going to Africa. She's going to steal our babies. She's taking our babies, and she don't know nothing about raising a black kid. And then even Madonna, when she did it, that what does she know about black kids? She don't know about nothing about black hair. And And then I've heard people talk about, oh, raising a black son. There is a conversation that you have with a black son regarding living as a black man in America. So, did you get, when you adopted 2 African-American sons, did the black people around you, were they all embracing, like, yay, white person has adopted African-American kids, yay? Or were they critical or what?
Well, mostly the people that commented were people we already knew.
Okay.
I mean, we had already lived here for a number of years and had relationships in the community, and we were living in the community. It's not like we adopted them and asked them to move out to the suburbs with us.
Okay.
We're living in the community. We're a part of we've been part of Black churches ever since we moved here. Our kids all went to the neighborhood schools. And so we were, we tried to be as immersed in the community and the culture as we could be. So we didn't get a lot of negative. We even had people in the community people that we would see on the street thank us.
Okay.
Did we get any negative? Oh, I'm sure we did. It's not like I recall.
You just didn't notice it because that wasn't what you were focusing on.
Yeah, and they weren't huge things, or I would remember them, and I just kind of don't.
And Washington D.C. is a pretty transient place, so we're used to different cultures mingling. So it's not like somewhere in Middle America or Southern America where they're not exactly used to the intermingling of cultures or multicultures. So I guess, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I do remember Alonzo coming home from middle school one day, and he was jumping or playing, going down the stairwell, and one of the teachers, an African-American teacher, called him out, and he stopped and apologized to her. And she looked at him and sneered and said, "You've been raised by them white people."
The bias slipped out.
She thought he was acting white, I guess.
He was acting proper.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Something.
When you're African American, you shouldn't act proper. You should act ratchet.
I don't know. We weren't there. All we know is what he told us.
Okay. So
it's just kind of funny.
I guess my question to you then will be, where were you before you moved into DC?
We were in Arlington, Virginia for 5 years. Before that, we were in College Park. So we lived around DC. We've lived around DC.
Okay, before you moved into the DC metro area.
We were in LA for 5 or 6 years. I went to school out there. That's where, college, that's where I met my wife. So we're in the LA area, and we moved back here because I was in grad school at University of Maryland.
So when you moved to the DC metro area, and the DC metro area, there are pocket places that are not very African American central, but generally speaking, it's there's a large population of African Americans. So when you came in, and yes, you stayed in Arlington and all the other places, and you finally moved into an area that was predominantly African American.
Right.
Did you experience any bias?
Sure.
What kind of bias did you experience?
I'd have been shocked if we hadn't. One of our first days, our kids went to the elementary school 2 blocks away up the street, and 650 some students, and our kids were the first. We were told our kids were the first white kids in the school since 1968.
Okay.
When the riots happened following the assassination of Dr. King, and white flight, finished everything off. All the whites moved out. And so ours were the first white kids in this elementary school since 68. And on one of the first days, in the first week or two of school, my wife was walking our kids home from school, and a Black dad walking behind her said, "Excuse me, aren't you afraid?" And my wife turned around and looked at him and said, "No, should I be?" And he said, "Oh, no. I mean, he really wasn't trying to be aggressive in any way. He was just curious. I don't know if that's bias. It was just interesting. It was an interesting question. We're still friends with him, by the way. I just saw him recently. He doesn't live here in the neighborhood anymore, but we still see him from time to time.
Okay.
There were There were questions by some people in the neighborhood about who we were or why we were here. And I work a job for a nonprofit organization. So I work out of my home. So I don't go to work from 8 to 5. And a good friend of mine, African-American friend here in the city, said, you got to be careful. What do people think that you do? You don't go to work. You don't go to a regular job. Who do you think they think you are? So I was accused of being a policeman on one occasion in particular.
An undercover agent in the Black community, spying on
Right.
the Blacks.
Right. Where I was threatened. I was threatened in the middle of the sidewalk, and a neighbor stepped in and said, "He's fine. He's a neighbor. Don't bother about him." So there were some of those instances, but we figured it went with the territory.
Then I do have 2 questions, but I don't know which one to ask first. Was it intentional to move into a Black community?
Yeah. Well, it was intentional to move cross-culturally.
Cross-culturally. Okay.
It was intentional for us to move. Living in Arlington, we became more and more aware of the fact that that there's you got your white suburbs in a donut, and then you got the city, which is primarily Black in the center. And what are we contributing? I come from a Christian perspective in my lifestyle and in my life. The organization I work for is a Christian ministry organization, and we have staff of our organization around the city in the donut, this round donut around the city, and very few in the city, in the African American or in cross-culturally, or not even cross-culturally, just in the Black community, for instance. So it was our intention to move in and be neighbors, to see how God might want to use us or allow us to be neighbors and love and care for people in the city. So yeah, we moved intentionally, cross-culturally, and that was into a African-American neighborhood here in DC, of course.
Okay, and then the second question, which I wasn't sure which to ask first, because you said you're a Christian. So and you're living in a Black community, so that means you most likely will worship in a Black church or a predominantly Black church. Right. And Sunday morning is the most segregational hour because somehow we may integrate, we may talk, we may align, but when it comes to that worship experience, the cultural expression of worship is different. And some people are very territorial about inclusion in their worship experience. So what was your experience going into a predominantly Black church to worship, where you immediately embrace oh, white man, come worship with us?
Well, the fact is that we knew when we were making this move. Here was our logic. Every neighborhood has schools. Every neighborhood has houses. But does every neighborhood have a good church that we can be a part of, that would accept us and welcome us? Okay. So that was the focus of our entry. Okay. I went around meeting and visiting while we're still living in Arlington, visiting a number of different churches that we knew of or heard of, were suggested to us, were referred to, etc. And I met a number of different pastors, had great conversations with many of them. And because of that, we chose this one church. Okay. That is here in our neighborhood. Okay. And we started going to church there a year before we moved. So in 1989, we began going to church, bringing our kids, driving Sunday morning to church here. The pastor welcomed us. We already knew the pastor. We had met with him. So he welcomed us, and the congregation welcomed us.
Okay.
We felt very welcomed. And then we began looking for a house in the neighborhood, and we found a row house right across the street from the church. So
Okay. So then did you, obviously, I'm sure you do. That's why you're a guest here, but let's just pretend like
okay.
you don't know.
I don't know.
You are aware of your white privilege.
I am.
When did you become aware of having white privilege?
That's a great that's a great question.
I always ask great questions.
Well, not everyone's as great as that one, but yeah.
You know what? I'm done with you.
That's a growing awareness,
Okay.
and I'm still learning that.
But when did this start becoming
Yeah.
aware that, oh, it's not an equal playing field, that you have an advantage that has been preset for you generationally, and it has all institutionally it has been preset for you? When did you become aware of it?
I think in reality, it was as I began to develop relationships with other African American men.
Okay.
As I got to know people and they began to trust me, which I understand has to be earned.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly for me, a white guy coming into a black neighborhood, I had to earn trust.
Mm-hmm.
And they as they learned to trust me and share pieces of their story with me, it started to become obvious that there's systemic stuff going on here that makes the playing field is not level.
Mm-hmm.
Until I have that personal experience in relationship with others and hear those stories, there's it's just mass media,
Mm-hmm.
it's movies, it's whatever kind of stuff you hear, and my brain can process and excuse and rationalize a whole bunch of that until when I have those personal relationships, my brain starts to go, okay, maybe this is an exception.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this person's an exception. But then you realize, no, they're not, because this person is also an exception, and this person is also an exception. And you begin to realize it's not that they're an exception, it's that the rules in my head are wrong.
Okay.
That the assumptions I have in my head have fallacies in them, and I need to adjust those assumptions in my head. And that's when I start admitting that there's a bias, there's a systemic bias that favors me and people like me. It just becomes more and more obvious.
So what about fellow Caucasians who can't grasp it, that there is the privilege that they have, somehow they can't grasp it? Is that an unconscious bias not to grasp it, a choice not to grasp it? Is that even an unconscious racist viewpoint, to not see something that is glaring?
You're asking if it's an unconscious bias?
On the part of the Caucasians who can't see that, oh, they have white privilege, or who constantly say, oh, no, it's a level playing field. Blacks are just lazy. They just don't want to work hard because it's a level playing field. So is it an unconscious bias on their part, or maybe it's a conscious one? Or could it even be an unconscious racist view to not see something that is so obvious?
There is such a long history of developing the whole idea of white superiority, which goes back maybe to Constantine in 300 AD, when he made Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire. But it moves on through Europe in papal bulls that were set down in the 1400s that declared that explorers who were discovering new lands had rights because they were the discoverers, and
Even though the
they
land
were,
had occupants in there.
even though the lands had occupants. And all of and then of course, let's just bring it up to today rather than tracing all of that history, although the history is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
The ways in which my people are acculturated to, even with our history of manifest destiny, doctrine of discovery, that we're now the chosen people of God kind of thing, replacing Israel. If you know anything about the way the Bible story goes. And so I'm taught in thousands of ways, large and small,
Acculturized.
that I'm acculturized. I'm better, I'm smarter, I'm more capable, etc. And so that all is normalized. It's normalized in my head. It's not advantage. It's not privilege. It's normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so for you to come and tell me you have privilege, I'm like, no, it's normal. It's just normal. It's not privilege. Privilege means it's above the norm. But
Mm-hmm.
for me and for my people, we're taught that it's just normal.
Okay.
And so I'm happy for you to come up to where I am, but what? I have to give up something? Why?
I have to
And
come down. I have to give up my privilege.
that's where reverse discrimination charges come from, because we are taught to think that culture teaches us
Mm-hmm.
that this is normal. We're just at the normal. And I've heard people say, when asked to describe their ethnicity, "Oh, I'm just a normal white person." Like, yeah, no, you're not. I mean, there is no such thing.
Okay. Now the flip side of that question is, because of the normalizing of that privilege, so a lot of African American people see the white man as a villain, and they
Yeah,
generalize it as every white man is a villain.
yeah,
Every white man
yeah.
is taking advantage of this privilege they have, and taking it as normal. And the systemic racism that African Americans feel, they are denying its existence, and which is a very maligning view from an African American's perspective. So now they look at the white person as every white person is a villain. So how do you react or respond to an African American who views you as a villain, like you're perpetrating what's going on, and so you're part of the problem?
I I I try to remember that every new person of color,
Mm-hmm.
African American or otherwise, that I meet is going to make certain assumptions about me that are very well earned,
Okay.
and that those assumptions are valid. I mean, they're valid assumptions from the history that they have, from what they know, and that I have to do the hard work of earning their trust. If that relationship is one that I want to build and grow, I have to do the hard work. I can't assume anything. I can't assume that they should like me or value me or appreciate me. I have to earn that, because we've earned, unfortunately, we've earned our reputation.
Okay.
So does it happen? Sure, it happens. We've lived here in the city now 31 years, so it doesn't happen as often, because I'm often meeting people in context with other friends that I already know, who trust me and introduce me as their friend, and it's clear that I'm a part of a group, a community of people.
Okay. So, I remember a friend of mine. He's African American, and I was hanging out with my Caucasian friend, and he met us, and he was surprised that I'm friends with a Caucasian person. And one thing he said was, You can't be friends with a white person until you've talked about the elephant in the room. Like, if that hasn't been talked about, then it's just civility. Everybody's being civil and dancing around it. Um, and would you say when you've become friends with minorities, that has been a topic that has had to be discussed so you know where their viewpoint, where so they know where your viewpoint is and they don't assume you're like the rest?
I'd say in my experience, there's levels of relationship
Okay.
that, no, I have relationships with African Americans that's never been a topic.
Okay.
But
But
certainly
would you say
when
you're close if it has never been a topic? Would you say you're close with them and somehow that topic has never come up?
um, they've ridden in my car. We've walked on the sidewalk and talked. We've maybe had coffee together.
Okay.
Those kinds of relationships. Are they my best friends? No. But they've been at my
They're not your
door.
besties?
They've been in my, not my besties, but they've been in my house.
Okay. Oh,
So
they've been in your house.
yeah.
Okay.
But I certainly find that if we do have that conversation, our relationship gets deeper,
Okay.
much deeper and more trusting. But I've always been, when we moved into this neighborhood, I tried to learn the names of every person on the block, even the guys selling drugs, even the alcoholics on the block. And we had both of those. And I just learned all their names and tried to treat all of them with respect, and say hello, no matter who they were, rather than ignoring this one group of people. And I think that goes a long way, just to initially breaking the ice and building some appreciation, realizing I appreciate you for who you are. Now, yeah, at first there were some that believed I was a policeman, so of course I'm learning their names. I want to be able to identify them. Well, but I think they got over that as some time went by.
Okay. So bias is, we all have unconscious bias, which we work to orientate and walk through. So, like, even me as a Black person, um, if I go out, for example, and I'm walking by the street and I see people, some dubious looking characters, I make sure my cell phone is not in my hand, because it's on the news how people can just walk and snatch your phone from your hand and run. It's been in the news. So unconsciously, I find myself doing that, like, oops, don't flash my phone before somebody snatches it from my hand. It's an unconscious thing. And then I have to tell myself, like, you know what? I've just prejudged these people. Just because I'm walking down here and these people look sketchy does not mean that they have a character defect. But living in the city is like you're trained that way to just assume the worst to survive. Just assume the worst. So as a person who the media constantly shows that, oh, African Americans, and the statistics show that we're always involved in crime. So it's very easy to generalize that, oh, all Black people are, especially if you see them on the street dressed like streetwear, chances are they're up to no good. How do you work against that bias? Do you, because you're human, you got to have bias. You're not all like, oh, I see you and I know you are wonderful. How do you, as a white man, work against the bias of stereotyping African Americans to be up to no good when they look like they might be up to no good?
But the first thing that was necessary for, well, there's several things, I guess. The first thing I did was I intentionally put myself in places where I got to know the people that. So I went, for instance, to a networking breakfast before we moved even into the city. I went to a Tuesday morning networking breakfast that met at a church downtown in the city, and it was a mixture of white and black, a lot of pastors, but a lot of lay people as well. But there were a group of prisoners that were coming out from Lorton, which was then a prison, that were coming from Lorton every day to actually work on renovating some houses or some buildings in the city. And they would come to this networking breakfast. And they always got there late. And so everybody would always leave on this big circle. There were often 60, 70 people at this networking thing. And they would leave a space for those guys to come in and sit down. There'd be like 15 of them. I would sit right in the middle of that section because I wanted to get to know those guys. I knew what pastors were like. I could meet with pastors all day long, but I couldn't meet with convicts. I wanted to get to know these guys who everybody would say, oh, these are dangerous guys. You better be careful. And it was a fairly safe situation, obviously. But I've always tried to cross as many boundaries as I can to get to know people, to build a relationship, and get to know.
Have you ever crossed boundaries like that and not got a positive result, but a negative result? Like, was your stereotype ever confirmed? Like, oh, you know what? I had this bias against you, and you confirmed it.
Well, yeah, I've had people scam me. I've given money to people that were scamming me. For instance, I need some help. My baby's. Yeah, right. So I've paid that price. I've also built some friendships, some very close friendships, by giving people money, and we became friends. And now we're very close. And don't give money anymore. They don't ask for money anymore.
Can I get some money while you're at it? Did you just get a stimulus check, or can I get something?
Haven't gotten that yet.
Can I get some?
But the other piece that had to happen is I had to start seeing those. I built a web of relationships here in DC with African American men and couples, families that. I began with great love and, deep relationships with people. But what got me was when I would be walking on the sidewalk back from my car to the house when I had to park a block and a half away for whatever reason. I'm walking back at night to my house and I hear footsteps behind me and I turn around and look. And what is my immediate gut reaction if it's a white person or a black person? If it's a white guy or it's a black guy. Now, initially, when we moved here, it was almost always a black people. Now it's become far more mixed.
Gentrification, hey.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess we were part of it. Yeah, that's another right. But I noticed this immediate gut reaction, a different gut reaction. I said, what is that? Why should I have that? And
so you identified the bias you had and you addressed it.
Absolutely. I recognized and had to admit, and I had to admit that I do have this deep bias about who's safe and who's not when they're people I don't know. But that's what shows the bias. To me, that's where the bias
leads
shows
to
up.
Stereotyping.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
And so I had to come to terms with that too, in order to recognize both who I am, who I think I am, and who other people are, and the value, what value I assign to me or them or whatever, and begin to work to adjust that.
Okay. But there's also, I'm a psychologist.
So I've heard.
You know what?
Congratulations.
But there's this, without going down that rabbit hole, but there's this concept of you never really know who you are until you're in a specific situation to reveal what you really are. So, would you say that you always had, or you've thought of yourself as this, or self concept that you had, and then a situation showed up to reveal your bias or stereotype, that you had to like, oh, I didn't know I had this deep down inside me. I thought I wasn't this. I thought I was this. And this showed up and revealed something in me that even shocked me. Have you had such?
Yeah, I've that's a good. I've had recently been thinking a lot about identity shifts.
Okay.
I think we all go through
Yes, we do.
significant moments of identity shift when we realize something. Sometimes it's a new thing, like when I became a husband.
Okay.
That's a new thing. I shouldn't have been a husband before. Now I am a husband. What does that mean? How does that change things? Then we had children. Okay, I wasn't a father before. Now I am. This is the right time. What do I need to do to? Okay, so those are shifts that happen at the right time, kind of thing,
Mhm.
right? There's other shifts that happen that um, that reveal some lack in me in the past. So,
Okay.
for instance, when I begin to recognize that I think I'm superior, what that points out to me is that you've always thought you're superior, Rick. How do you reevaluate who you are and your life up till now, given this new identity, right?
Okay.
So I had a case where a person that I knew that sometimes had some conflict with, and I raised the issue with this individual, and the individual said to me, "You're arrogant. You just think you're better than me." And this was an African American person.
Is it the one that we had and I told you that?
That was a little later. Yeah. Um, and the I try to, when I get those kinds of that kind of input, I
Hmm.
try to take it and think it through and think, okay, what in this is true? Even if there's only 5%, let's learn from it. Let me learn from it. And I sat down and spent some time, and I acknowledged that this individual was correct,
Okay.
that it was true. That I think was a at the time, I didn't realize where this was leading, but because I thought it was just this individual. But then as I continued to think about it, I realized, wait a second, this is broader than just that individual.
Okay.
This is a broad. And so that was that was, I think, that was an important moment in my journey of recognizing how I think of myself as being, how I tend to think of myself, and then realizing how all white people, because we're all acculturated in the same way here in this country,
Hmm.
I would suggest that all white people think we're superior. Now, some argue with me on that, so I
And
don't
that's
try
and that
to.
leads me to my last question. How time does fly. We obviously would have to do a part two of this. Um, my last question to you is, okay, so the average white person watching this, and they're like, oh, this Black Lives Matter is extreme. It's why does all lives matter? Why do they say Black lives? And somehow they can't get the concept of why the idea of a Black Lives Matter started. Because they're like, no, it's racist. Or even something like BET, why BET had to start, or NAACP, why it had to start. That very thing somehow keeps eluding them. What would you say to that person who thinks they are all, that white person that thinks, oh, I'm okay, I'm normal, I'm level, I don't have bias. What would you say to that person?
Well, um, Yeah, I'd want to try to ask some questions and hear more about what they're thinking. But one of the ways I think about that is, yes, it's of course all lives matter. No one's saying all lives don't matter. No one's suggesting that. No one's suggesting that all lives don't matter. All lives matter. Of course, we all know that. But let's say you live on a cul-de-sac. There's 8 houses around the cul-de-sac that you live on, and you come out of your house one morning, and the house across the street, you're in house number 6, and house number 3 across the street is on fire. So you, being a good neighbor, get out your hose and start spraying your house, right? Because all houses matter. So my house matters. Well, of course your house matters, but your house isn't on fire. And so in this day, we're seeing again and again, for instance, the killing of black men. Mm-hmm. And so the Black community is on fire. There is danger going on, a dangerous situation for Black people, for African Americans. And let's address that. Let's get our hose out, go across and pull our hose across the street if we can, and help spray some water on the house that's on fire. Let's give some attention to that house that's in danger, the house that's being ravaged by whatever the issues are that are going on. That's kind of one of the ways I think about that.
The way I like that. The way I formatted mine was, it's like 2 people have dire illnesses. One has cancer, one has diabetes, and the one that has diabetes is asking for a cure. And then the one that has cancer, why are you asking for a cure? You should ask for a cure for all sicknesses. Why are you asking for a cure for diabetes? Ask for a cure for cancer too, and ask for a cure for AIDS and something else. Why are you asking for yours? And it's like, I'm sick, I'm dying, no help is coming in. So I got to cry out for help. Crying out for help doesn't mean I'm against cure for cancer. No, I'm not. I just need a cure for diabetes. And that's what I'm crying out for.
That's good. I like that.
Well, thank you for this conversation. We definitely got to do part 2, because there are some race relations is a hot topic in this country, and for things to resolve or for things to go in the direction of resolution, continuous conversation has to be had. It's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous conversation, an honest conversation that has integrity without anybody trying to accuse anybody, trying to put down anybody. Because once accusations come in, then defenses go up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Yep. Well, thank you, Rick, for this conversation.
Thank you, Kenneth. All right. We'll talk again.
Okay. And that was my conversation with Rick Yorgey. We definitely will be a part 2 to that, because we do need to have a continuous conversation regarding race relations. Not sure. Yes, it looks monumental to bring about mutual understanding and to change, for that institutional shift to happen. But it's not an impossible dream. I mean, Martin Luther King had a dream, and there has been some progressive shift. Yes, in some areas, and in some areas it looks like it has been stagnant. But I am a Christian, and I believe now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So I have to have faith and believe that a shift can happen. There is a progressive move that can be made. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, do not hesitate to leave it in the comment section. Like the video, subscribe, share it with your network, and of course support. And thank you very much for watching this episode.